everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today I have with me, let me get it right because I've been practicing, Dmitry Badiarov, right? Awesome,
Wonderful.
awesome. So this is the man. He is a accomplished violin player, and he makes violins. And I'm going to open up and say that while I know the instrument, I'm very ignorant about the whole process, but I am very teachable. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So welcome to the show, Dimitry. Thank you for hanging out with me.
Oh, my pleasure, Lana. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this message with your and my listeners. So very excited about this.
Okay. So first and foremost, how does a young boy get introduced to the violin in the first place? How did your story start?
Oh, that brings me back a long time ago. Yeah. I grew up in a musical family, and I guess for babysitting reasons, literally for practical reasons, probably my parents didn't find anyone to sit with me. My dad had to bring me to the opera, that's where he worked. Mm-hmm. And that was my first introduction to the world of music, opera. And I really fell in love with that. And it was magical. Mm-hmm. The labyrinth of narrow corridors beneath the stage, the decorations, yes. And during the performances, of course, crowds of people and lots of colors and very unusual fancy dresses on stage, beautiful music, beautiful stories. And there were operas for grown-ups, and there were also children's plays, and I enjoyed equally both. And because I felt that the audience was so happy. Anyway, I was really happy to be at those performances. And because the audience was so happy, and somehow it really touched me to see people happy and smiling. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I didn't want to go back home. No. And it was like I was 5 years of age when it became clear to me that I would like to be a musician. Although I haven't decided yet that I would like to be a violinist. So that came a little bit later. But this is how I was introduced into the world of music, and I decided that this would be my profession.
Beautiful. So you said you hadn't decided yet that the violin was going to be your instrument of choice. As a young child, because we go through these phases as little ones, we want to be a doctor, we want to be a teacher. But I'm wondering for you, did you have different musical instrument options that you were exploring before you chose the violin?
Not really. It was like the love from the first sight.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it is due to a very gifted pedagogue, professor, my very first teacher of violin, who transferred his passion for music to myself and to all of his students. Actually, I'm still in a very close relationship with him up to this date. And it's definitely thanks to this man that I chose the violin, and I stuck with violin for the rest of my life. And he was my next door neighbor. So imagine this. It was really unbelievable. It's like a dormitory of the local opera, and about 200 meters long corridor with rooms on both sides. And his door was literally in front of my door. Awesome. And when he played the violin, I would lean with my ear against the key lock, and would just listen for hours, breathless. It was like magical moments. Yeah, that's how I got passionate about violin, literally.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. Now, I want to kind of move on to, because the violin, that is your instrument, that is your, it blossomed in you as a young person. But there came a point in your life where it looked like you and the violin might have to part ways. Can you share that story with us?
Yeah, well, it's maybe not the most favorite part of my story. It is an adversity. It happened to be an adversity in my life. So it brings us to January 19, 2013. And up to that date, I was a very busy touring concert violinist, playing with absolutely incredible groups. touring all around the world. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful time as a musician with incredible musicians. I was really blessed to have that opportunity to make music with some of the most amazing musicians. But at a certain moment, that was January 19, 2013, I had a massive health issue which nearly killed, and which is when it became clear I would not be able to play anymore. Well, actually, probably I would be able to play if I wanted to. But at that moment, the doctor said that, well, Dimitry, you would be very lucky if you would learn how to walk normally, if you would learn how to speak normally, because at that time, at that moment, even that wasn't clear. However, I recovered 300%. Here's why I like to speak about this. It's not because I've lost access to music, but because this was a moment of adversity in my life, a moment of life-changing decisions, so to speak. And this is when, thanks to my wife, I realized that, yes, maybe I could potentially sometime later relearn how to play the violin or build violins. But it was, at that moment, it was not clear. And I thought that I would not be able to move. I thought I would spend the rest of my life in bed. And this is when my wife helped me realize that, Dimitry, if you just share what you already know with other music professionals, then that means that, well, you just share your knowledge. You don't have to work physically. Just, share your knowledge. You don't have to play concerts. You don't have to produce instruments. And that will help a lot of professionals to achieve what I was able to achieve. Okay. So, and that somehow really made sense to me. So this was a low moment, but thankfully, this turned out to be one of the best moments, maybe. It's very funny. It sounds very funny now. And I can laugh about this today, but at that moment, it was not very funny.
No, we don't know what direction to go, where this is leading us, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. So were you making violins before your
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. So how did you start doing that? Or is that the natural evolution of a violin player? You just segue into making violins. How did that start?
Wow, that's a very, very ancient story. Yeah, that's really even longer than the violin playing story, because again, it's due to meeting absolutely fabulous man. This man, he was about 65 years of age or something like this, wearing a very thick leather apron. He was a craftsman, a neighbor craftsman. He was making all kinds of furniture and repairing things. He was the kindest man I ever met, with his giant, thick eyeglasses, the kind of eyeglasses that looked like magnifying glass for his eyes, an absolutely amazing smile. So he was like a magician for me, with all these tools and the smell of wooden shavings and varnish and this and that. And I got really fascinated by just being around, just hanging around this man. And I was very, very young. I was 5, actually, to be exact. And my dream was to build a sailing boat. For some reason, I don't know why, my parents refused to buy a sailing boat. I still don't.
No.
Yeah. So then my parents said, no, we're not going to buy a sailing boat. You have to make it yourself. With the help of this gentleman, I got involved with with tools and so I was kind of really handy with tools. And when I started playing the violin, that's another funny story. My professor was trying to get that beautiful sound, and I was not able to get that. And after sweating and suffering a long hour or something like this, I just feeling completely desperate, I stopped playing and I looked at him and at his violin, and I said, Simeon, look at your violin. You're playing an amazing 18th century precious Italian violin, and I'm playing this terrible piece of wood. We call it violin. it doesn't matter how hard I practice or how much I practice, I will never sound that beautiful. He agreed. And so then I suggested, why don't we first fix my violin? And he introduced me to an instrument maker in the town.
Okay.
And somehow I insisted that the instrument maker would not just fix my violin, but would teach me how to fix my violin. And luckily, he accepted me as an apprentice at his workshop, and he taught me how to take this terrible instrument apart, how to fix, how to adjust things and put it back together. And of course, it didn't sound like an Italian violin. Afterwards, it still was a terrible factory-made violin, but there was a difference, and the difference was big enough to inspire me and to put me on fire for the rest of my life, because there was a big difference. And I felt like, wow.
This is it.
This is it. Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah, I got involved with that.
Okay. Now, I hear you say some terms like Italian violin, and I'm thinking about you were a small little person when so like I said in the opening, I'm very ignorant about this whole process, but I'm thinking there's different types of violins, the way you can customize it. What all goes into making a violin? Because I'm thinking just a piece of wood, some strings or whatever, but what's the process to customizing a violin?
This is a fantastic question, Lana. Actually, a very deep question, and it's very difficult for me to be brief about this. Because of course it's my entire life in doing that. But this is exactly the question I was thinking about when I was building my very first violin, and the approach to instrument making in today's instrument making industry is buying a real life-size poster of, let's say, Stradivari or Guarneri del Gesso violin. So you get a poster, and sometimes they sell also these books of posters. You get a poster, then you trace it on a piece of wood, and then you kind of make a replica, But I was not very happy with this approach, because being naturally a very curious person, I was wondering, but wait a second, why the violin has that shape? They could have picked it any other way. There are so many different musical instruments, yet violin is unique. What is the reason why it has that shape and why it has that incredible sound like none other instrument? And this is the kind of thing I've been thinking about since 1988 or 89, when I was 19 or 20 or something like that. I was still a student at St. Petersburg Conservatoire as a violinist, as a modern violin. And it was about a little bit later, I was building my very first violin. And as a student, I happened to be in Spain. So we are now in Merida. Imagine mid-July, very warm summer night, stars in the sky, like Milky Way above, and you see a Roman amphitheater before your eyes, full of people, orchestra on stage with the celebrated Mstislav Rostropovich, the conductor. And I'm sitting in that orchestra, and I'm feeling absolutely enchanted by the sound of music, and especially by the acoustics of that site. And well, look, this is open air, and usually if you play violin outdoors, it sounds terrible. Musicians don't like playing outdoors because there is no reverb. The sound doesn't come back. It sounds very dry. It's very unfulfilling. But in this theater, Roman theater, 2,000 years old, well, I'm not sure about the age exactly, but it is very old. It sounded like one of the finest concert halls ever. And I realized, listen, the ancient masters knew something that the modern architects or the modern acousticians have no clue about. They knew something we don't know, and definitely they applied that same knowledge in musical instruments. And so with that, that it was then at that moment, this burning desire to discover what was the ancient master acoustical concepts, the desire to discover those concepts. This is when it was born, and it took me an entire life to discover what precisely they were doing. Now, to answer your question, and just to give some food for thought to our listeners. So basically, Roman architects in those times used music in order to design those theaters. It's like some mathematics, and it is harmonical proportions, which means all the proportions in the theater are musical proportions. Okay. So that means that anything you see, you can translate it into music literally. And it is actually even written in ancient sources. So like imagine you are working somewhere in Rome or Salamanca or Madrid or any European ancient town, and you see palaces and churches, and you can translate all this architecture into music quite literally. You can translate everything you see into melodies. And this is precisely what the ancient masters in the 17th or 18th century, or the masters that were building actually violins, they were using exactly the same approach in building and designing those fantastic instruments. And it is even documented in a number of historical sources. Curiously enough, even the Italians lost this knowledge already in the 18th century, which is also documented. And it took me a few decades to discover this and crystallize this into a very simple 5-step method that I can, I'm very, very passionate about this. I'm really passionate about transmitting this knowledge to both musicians so that they finally realize, wait a second, there is more to violins than just making copies from posters, and also to transfer this knowledge to instrument makers who would love to go that extra mile in serving their musicians and create outstanding instruments with thousands of years of culture beneath. That musical culture, this ancient Roman Greek culture that was really feeding the aesthetics and philosophy of European art and everything for 2,000 years approximately.
Wow. Impressive. Yeah. I think that's something, you know, especially when because I've always been taught it's best to get involved and interested in music at a very young age. So for a child to have their world opened by hearing about the history of the violin and where it comes from, not just holding this thing in their hand and like, oh, my parents are making me practice or whatever. But I think if they hear the history, everything will just the magic will start to open for them. That's wonderful. That's a beautiful story. You know, you never think about how music plays in so many parts of our life. I know for me, it's been there for my ups and downs, but to hear you say how it's been in the different eras of this world, it's just beautiful story.
Yeah.
I want to ask you real quick, because you make violins now. And that brings in a business element. And from what I've experienced throughout the course of my life, Dimitry, when you deal with people who are creative musicians, the business side of things is not really their strong point. How do we? How does that? How does that kind of merge? How does that?
Ouch! That's.
You know, creative people I just want to do my craft and I want to be good at my craft, and you handle the business, but how do you merge the two?
Yeah, this is brutally true. I can't agree even more. That's very true. Musicians, artists, instrument makers, including, are usually pretty good at their stuff, and they're passionate about it, their stuff. And I 100% understand that, of course. What I agree with you that in order for musicians or artists or instrument makers, for that matter, to be able to focus on their craft, they need to put that craft, that art, in front of their audiences. Now, this is where the entrepreneurial skills come in very, very handy, because without these skills, an artist can be this world's best kept secret, literally. And this is unfortunately exactly what is happening with lots of freelance musicians, or musicians in general, with lots of artists. And it's very true also about instrument makers. And yeah, I'm equally passionate about the business side of the career, because this is what allows an artist to focus on their gift rather than on problems, and grow their gift and fulfill their personal and artistic and financial aspiration and spiritual aspiration through their art, by being able to really serve people. Yeah, this is where this is where marketing comes in. This is where the sales skills come in very handy. This is where presentation skills comes in handy. This is where an artist or musician must be able to communicate clearly with their audience, so that they vibrate on the same frequency, so that audience does get it. What is so special about that artist? Because so 25 years ago, maybe this was really simple. There were just a handful of artists. And it was very simple business. Just play well or make great instruments. That's it, finished. But today, there's so much of everything. There are so many musicians, so many instrument makers, so many artists. And without even just one thing for that matter, just like, let's say, without a story. If the artist or a musician or an instrument maker doesn't have a story to share with their musicians, then he or she is literally one per minute. Whereas like with a story, you are one of a kind.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's very deep, and there are many elements involved in entrepreneurship, from technical skills to soft skills, like I've just mentioned, mindset, all these kind of things.
Yes. And like I said, everybody that I know who has that creative element, be it music or art or whatever, business tends to be, the business side tends to be something that they're lacking. And I would see that, using your services, teaching you how to incorporate the two, how to be well in business, as well as your craft as far as music. It's essential. It's vital, because we hear so many times where the creative person is taken advantage of because they don't have the business skills. So
that is so true. There are so many publications on this subject matter. Unbelievable. This is very, very true. And which is why I'm really, really passionate about helping music professionals to be more self-sufficient, more self-sustainable, more masters of their gifts and their lives and their time. And it is absolutely doable. And today it is easier than ever in the history of humankind. I believe today it is the best time ever to be a music professional, period. That's it. But without those skills, yes, we are a little bit Jurassic.
Now, I'm listening to you talk. A question popped up. Now, I know you make violins. I know you play. Do you teach as well?
Oh, yes. I do teach. Yes, I do teach instrument makers how to master the ancient masters' acoustic concepts. And also the marketing side of the business, of course. Oh,
okay. So now we're in 2021 at modern times, and I'm pretty sure we all know the classical violin, but has it evolved? Is there these new funky modern violins perhaps for these young kids that want these new things? Is there a new style of violin?
There is a lot. There are lots of very interesting developments in that space.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, music is broad, and it really depends on whom you want to serve. So what is your target audience? So for me and majority of my students, instrument makers, we are serving those musicians who play the more classical instruments. So these, but of course, then there are players and instrument makers who focus on jazz or all kinds of contemporary music, and that is it's a very interesting area as well.
Okay.
I feel I'm just not going in that direction because I know where my focus and where my true passion and where my biggest experience also lies. So that's more classical.
Classical music. And I think it really is good for young people to learn classical music. There's lots of research out there that classical music helps you build your intellectual skills as well. So I think it's really a nice introduction at a very young age that people that young people should be introduced to.
That's so true what you said about that. You know, when I have to create some difficult document, when I have to focus for hours on and just to write something, think through something, it really helps me to just listen music while I'm thinking about something. I'm not necessarily listening intently to some Bach or Mozart or something, some of my favorite things, but still, just because it is there, it helps so much.
It helps so much.
Brain activity, focus and being in flow, being inspired. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, that was one of the first year in college. One of my professors told me to study with classical music, and it will help me retain the information more. So that was one of the, besides Bugs Bunny, I don't know if you're familiar, besides Bugs Bunny as a child, but that was my first introduction to classical music. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about making violins. Are there different styles of violins?
Yeah, there are many styles of violins. Indeed, that's one of my areas of expertise, creating instruments for different historical epochs.
Oh, okay.
There are several periods of Baroque violins, like violin for 16th century music or violin for 17th century, 18th century music. They are completely different things. Okay. And then, of course, we need to be connected somehow with the reality of the 21st century. So what do musicians play today? Even those who specialize in, let's say, Baroque music from the 17th or 18th century, up to the 19th century, maybe. So what do they play? And then sometimes we need to come up with some kind of compromise that musicians can still be fairly close to the original intent of those composers that they admire and they love to play, but not too restrictive. So they can play, let's say, late 17th century music and also late 18th century music on the same instrument.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. I wish I should have asked you to because you still play a little bit, right?
Not really. Yeah, I could, I think.
Oh, okay. I would like to at least see one of your creations, though. I should have thought about that before the show, but it would have been nice to see one of your craftsmanship.
Actually, I play frequently, especially with my wife. So I'm used to produce a little video or two when I complete an instrument for a client somewhere in the world before the instrument is packed and shipped away, or the customer comes to the Netherlands to collect the instrument. Usually I just pick my instrument, and then my wife is also a brilliant musician, so we frequently play together. And there are, I would probably be not exaggerating if I said a few thousand videos on Facebook and 400 or 500 videos on YouTube where I play.
Great. Yeah. You mentioned your wife. Now, the other benefit of music is it makes it easier for a man to catch a woman. We're suckers for the musicians. So. Probably if I had her on the show, she would be like, yes, that's probably the reason I fell in love with him.
She would absolutely be in agreement.
All right, Dimitry. My 30 minutes is up. It goes so fast. I could talk to you a little bit longer, but I try to get people on their way. I'm going to do my random question, and I would like for you, after we do the random question, tell people how they can get into. Do you make violins and ship them worldwide, or how does?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. So it's not a situation where, let's say I have my 5-year-old, do they have to be fitted? How do you take body measure? Because it has to be, I'm assuming different people need different sizes and different requirements, or am I just being ignorant?
This is an amazing question. That's true. So there is, so to speak, a universal model that is more or less okay for majority of players. But one of the specialties of my shop is custom designing instruments to specific players, like a hand or the body. Because look, the truth is, when the violin was born in the late 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, it was predominantly played by men. if we look at classical music in the 20th century, there were hardly any women. Speak about inclusion. There was almost predominantly male business, but today it's very different. Today there are diverse, just as many, even maybe even more women, and sometimes it just makes complete sense to create something custom designed for them, because many of them are not as giant as some Russian bears playing violins.
Yeah, the hand span and everything like
that. Exactly. Yes. And it happens all the time. I get an order from someone from Latin America or from Japan, and they would come and they or send me an email, and we have a conversation on Zoom that, hey, Dimitry, I've been playing with chronic pain for years, and I've been looking for an instrument for many, many years. Visit all the dealers, all the makers, and I tried everything, but there's absolutely nothing that I can find. Well, and then, I would design the instrument specifically for that instrument, for that player, for her hand or his hand. And then, it's sometimes so beautiful and so touching. Yeah. The other day I had, it's already a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, there was a wonderful player, and she was playing with pain in her left hand because even a small sized violin was too big for her. It was too big. And the instrument makers and dealers told her, well, if that is too big for you, you have to play child-sized violin. Yeah, you're kidding me. She's a professional player. Of course, she cannot play child-sized violin. So I designed for her a special violin, which is small, but looks big at the same time and has big, full sound. And when she came finally to pick up her instrument, she started playing, and a few moments later, a tear was rolling on her cheek, and I thought, oh my goodness, she doesn't like it.
That's the first time she had a perfect fit.
And then I asked, is something wrong? And she said, Dimitry, the first time in my life I'm playing the violin without pain. And I absolutely love these moments when I create something that is absolutely perfect fit for the player.
Oh, that is such a beautiful story. Her love and appreciation for the violin and the music, that she was suffering through it in pain regardless, until she comes across you and finds the magic key. That's just beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Dimitry, let me ask you the question here and get you on, because I can see we could talk for a little while here. Let's see here. What we got? Random question here. What is the most useful thing your mom or dad has taught you?
Definitely seeing beauty. My mother especially was absolutely incredible in that. And she would always draw my attention. Look at this, how beautiful that is.
That's great. Especially
and from my father, I think it is patience, maybe.
Patience. That'll get you far in life. We do need a lot of patience. All righty, Dimitry, tell everybody how they get in touch with you if music entrepreneurs want to contact you for help with that. If somebody wants a custom violin, or somebody just wants to say hello and listen to you or watch you.
Thank you for that question. Yes, they can find me super easily. So they can find me on my website. So people who are looking for instruments, they can find me on my website, Badiarov Violins. So that is with the 2 V's, Badiarov, and then violins.com. Or instrument makers who would like to start building a legacy at bench and leaving a mark the world cannot ignore or erase. They can find me on AuthenticInstrumentMakersAcademy.com. And this is where I teach instrument makers the ancient masters acoustic concepts, and as well as the entrepreneurial skills.
Oh, great. Now, you're in the Netherlands. Is that what I heard?
Yep, I'm in The Hague.
Okay, so before we get out of here, when I was a young girl, my dad was stationed in Eindhoven, so we were in the Netherlands many years ago. But so if I wasn't a vegetarian, I'd ask you to send me some frites vlees from Holland, from the Netherlands. But It's okay. But anyways, Dimitry, I have had such a good time being educated. I am one to admit when I don't know, but teach me something. So I learned a lot today about the whole craft and the industry. So thank you for enlightening me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. That is all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I'm your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time.